The buzzword in politics these days seems to be evil. I hear it so often when it comes to people with their political rhetoric, and they say, well, that is just so evil, or only an evil person would do something like this, or I hear it a lot on the conservative side because that is the side in which I hear most of the content that I get, but I do seek out content from the other side as well. So, I've heard it on both sides, but I know that I do hear it particularly often on, the conservative side of things, which makes sense because a lot of people who are in the conservative political side of things happen to be Christian or religious, or not everybody. I mean, I'm not, and I don't even know exactly. I mean, I don't actually think I am conservative. I think I'm moderate. I'm middle of the road, independent. But yeah, apparently that makes me far right, according to some definitions. So fascinating. But evil, let's talk about this word evil, because I'm trying to get to the root of what people mean by it. And unfortunately, what happens is when that word gets used a lot, I think often many people just stop listening, especially people on the other side. It's just like, roll your eyes and just kind of like, okay, here we go. You think I'm evil now, or you think this person's evil. And it just kind of, I've also heard it as a way to dismiss other people. For me, I think it's really important to understand where people are coming from. I want to understand both sides. I want to understand the perspective of the person that has an opinion that's different from me, so that I can, if I don't agree, at least I know where they're coming from. And, I was talking to two of my friends. We were having a conversation this weekend, and one of my friends said, well, that's just downright evil. We were talking about what's going on right now in North Carolina and the storm that just hit. And I'm not sure how many of you have gone down the rabbit hole of realizing that or learning that BlackRock had purchased the world's largest lithium mine, which was actually in that area in North Carolina just weeks before the hurricane hit. And so as a result of the hurricane, people, these companies that are concerned about profit are using this as a bit of a not a bit. It seems to be that there's a land grab happening, and it also seems to be that FEMA is blocking people from helping, and it's a tragic thing. And I don't know, to play devil's advocate, it could be that FEMA is trying to, they are keeping people, citizens from flying in who are rescuing people. They are keeping shipments of food coming in, and there are people who have some pretty elaborate, what would be called conspiracy theories about it. And then my friend said, that's downright evil, right? That there are shipments or truckloads full of water and food and supplies that were coming in. And FEMA actually, there's videos of them slashing the tires of a truck, not allowing them to come through, arresting somebody who was flying in on his own dime. And so, I don't know what the reasons are. Maybe it's because the FEMA representatives feel like they wanted to be able to monitor what was going in and out. I'm not sure what the situation is. To me, I imagine that it was somebody that wanted to have control of the situation, maybe trying to organize a situation. I certainly could go into another direction and say, oh, well, it's because they have this hidden agenda and they don't want people to survive and yada, yada, yada. And I just don't see how that particular thought form is healthy. And so it just kind of puts me against my fellow citizens. But you know, when my friend said, "Well, that's evil," that they would do that, and I'm like, well, what does that even mean? Because when I hear the word evil, I stop listening. It's just, you know, having grown up in the church and having left the church, I feel like that just sort of like reduces the conversation. And my other friend, who also came out of religion and is not particularly religious anymore, said, yeah, but it is evil. Like when a person is, people are dying, people need water, people need food, and some other people are blocking that helpful action from coming in. She's like, I would define that as evil. And so we started to kind of talk about what it means. And one of the things we talked about is like going against the rules of nature, that it's human nature to want to be helpful. It's, well, at least some human, but the like the universal laws of, you know, what you give out comes back to you. And so but gosh, I wish that I could have been recording the whole conversation, because it was really such a fantastic conversation. But we started, one of the things that my friend said is, she's like, well, it's just, you know, there's this idea, and this is something too that I encountered when I was spending time at the temple and learning Eastern philosophy and kind of integrating my religious upbringing with then the meditation and the spiritual practices, which the spiritual practices for me actually were teaching me how to use and understand the flow of energy within my body and around me. And so one of the things that I wanted to point to is my very perfectly accurate, this is sarcasm, drawing of the yin yang. So obviously this is not perfect, but this is illustrating the idea. This is an ancient symbol. And, you know, in this symbol, you have what should be a perfect circle with perfectly balanced, colored in side and a light side, with a little circle in the middle of each so that it balances. So when you have something like this, it's often really tempting to say, okay, this is darkness, this is light, this is good, this is evil. And one of the things that I really tried to shift my perspective to is, if you imagine a battery has two sides, you know, and so you have like a positive charge and a negative charge, and that they must be balanced. And so one of the things that I learned in the teachings of the Eastern philosophy is that there's always both, and there has to be both. There has to be both. And what I heard described is that it's the tension of the two pulling on each other, that in the middle, the tension right in the middle between the two, that tension creates, is where 3D physical reality happens. It's where it springs into actual physical manifestation. And so when you look at the world and it feels like evil is winning, or people say, well, good must prevail. Well, I don't know that that's exactly right, because if every single person on the planet, you know, meditated and held nothing but love and light in our bodies, it would be off balance. And in fact, in my own physical body, in every person's physical body, we actually have to hold both polarities of energy in our body. Now I'm going to get to how this connects to evil, good and evil, in a minute, but let's just first talk about this idea. So I drew another picture here. It's really stellar. I mean, you guys are going to be really impressed by the quality of this image. But that same night that I was having this conversation with my friends, my daughter was having some interpersonal situation, and I went and I was laying with her, and I started to do some energy work on her. And when I was laying with her, so you've got two sides of the body, okay? So you've got right and you've got left. Hopefully that shows up on the screen. So you've got right and left. So the way that I'm going to call it magnetic field of the body works, it may not be completely accurate. I'm not a scientist. I have figured these things out through my process. This is just me sharing my process. That's why I call it Journeys of Awakening, Tales of Awakening. I'm not trying to say that, but okay. Just, this is the right hand. So this is my giving hand. So the way that the energy flows through my body is that it flows out my body on the right side. And then on the left side, the energy flows into my body. And so in perfect balance, you are going to have a body that is, let's see, I pulled out some pictures. So not because I'm really high tech here. So this is an example of like a toroidal field that people talk about, the heart's magnetic field. But if you look here, so on the right side, you'd have the energy coming into the body. It's coming like out through the heart. So this field is sort of being generated by the heart. And then you have the energy flowing out this way. And then you have the energy flowing in this way, if this is the right side. And so I'm going to look and see if I can find one more picture. So, yeah, I guess I'm not going to be able to find it like super quickly. But so I started doing energy work on my daughter, and what happened was I was explaining to her about how it flows. So I was telling her, okay, it was kind of blocked here, so the flow just wasn't happening. And so I was sharing with her some of the thought forms that I've developed that help me to be able to have flow in my body. And so I was telling her that what I imagine going out my right hand, out the tips of my fingers, as I'm trying to imagine like opening up the flow in my right side. I imagine that the energy is flowing out the tips of my fingers, and you have to direct it somewhere because you don't want that just sort of bouncing off. And like, when I'm around other sensitive people and I'm releasing energy, then I have the power, like it could, accidentally affect them too. And I'm not trying to do that. And so what I imagine is that at the center of the earth, there is a molten core of lava, which is based off of, what I learned in school. But I imagine that molten core of lava is the hottest fire that burns on this planet. And so in Hinduism, they have the sacred fire, the dhuni, where people put all of their prayers. And when you put your prayers into the dhuni, or the sacred fire, what happens is they get burned and reduced to ash. So sometimes people will offer rice or food, and they'll put all of the energy of the prayer into the rice and then throw it into the fire and say swaha and offer it to the fire. And so if your prayers are good, if your prayers are bad, it burns away the physical thing and releases the prayer or the energy up to heaven, wherever it's going to go. And then the rice it reduces to ash. So oftentimes I've been sitting in fire ceremony and I have something that's really bothering me, something that's on my heart, something that I need to release, and I feel safe and comfortable releasing it into the fire because I know that it's going to neutralize that. And so when in my mind I am opening the channel of energy and really the flow, I imagine that when the energy is coming out my body, I am sending it always directly into that molten core in the center of the earth, so that whatever it is can be neutralized and reduced back to ash. In my mind, it's a thought form that is assisting me in the process. Now, of course, in a circumstance in which I am directing loving energy or something, that's a different conversation. But for the purposes of like grounding my body, so one side so I told Rosie, I was explaining to her the thought form that I use is I release what no longer serves me. And so I imagine that it's flowing out my hand, out the tips of my finger on my right side, because that is the side that is on that side. And then also my right foot, my leg. So I imagine the energy, flowing through my body. It comes out here. It's coming down on this side of my body. It's flowing down. So it's coming out my arm, and then flowing down my right foot and down into the earth as well to keep me grounded. And then on the left side, which is the receptive, so this is my giving side, this is my receiving side. And so energetically speaking, on the left side, my foot, is receiving energy from the earth, and it's coming up through my body, up into my heart. From my hands, it's coming in, and then it's coming out the top of my head. And so you've got this you've got this flow of energy through your body. So one side is a positive polarity and one side is a negative polarity. One side is light and one side is I'm not going to say dark as in darkness, as in evil. See, this is what I want to clarify. And so this is why we're having this conversation about good and evil, light and dark, positive and negative, because I think that we often get them all jumbled up and confused, but I think that we use the same word to describe a couple different phenomenon that are happening. So yesterday, it has been about 4 weeks since I've gone to chant and sing with my people. It's the thing that I do for my own spiritual practice. It helps me. And I was singing. And when I sing, okay, wait, I'm getting derailed. So I told Rosie when she was grounding her energy, release what no longer serves me. And then, the other thing I was telling her was about receiving energy. So when your heart is open, then what's happening is your heart, like in that image that I was showing, your heart is the thing that creates this field around the body. It's this magnetic field that then becomes your shield. Because if your heart is active and radiating and it's holding this space, then ideally speaking, when you're fully grounded and in a healthy, whole space, then what happens is that your heart is holding sort of an energetic frequency to which then, like, if negativity or things come at you, it would bounce off because it's not in the same. So the only things that can come through are things that are on that same vibration or frequency. And so ideally speaking, you want to, as an empathic person, as a sensitive person, I want to have this thought form activated and this understanding activated within my body, that what I'm taking into my body is only going to resonate with these highest vibrations that I want to allow in. And ideally speaking, I want to not allow in the things that will bring me harm. And so I release what no longer serves me, and I am protected from what would seek to harm me, right? And so I'm only taking in. So then I'm imagining that what's coming into my body is going to be this love and this light and these really high vibrations. So then yesterday I'm singing. So I go to this place where there's a group of people singing. It's a beautiful space. They hold a really loving space. And I was closing my eyes and I was really just grounding myself and kind of meditating while everyone was singing around me, kind of preparing myself to enter into this space. And I started to really think about this receiving side, because I personally happen to be somebody that is an over giver, and in an unhealthy way throughout my life is just giving, 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 giving. Just like this same idea that my friend is saying, like, well, we just need to bring more light because we need to overshadow the darkness, and the darkness can't have power over us. And my comment is, well, it's got to be both. It's always both. It has to be in balance. And so it got me thinking about me. I need to be in balance. And so when I was sitting there, it was in a space where I felt very safe, I felt very comfortable, and I started to imagine that on this side of my body, it's like, okay, this is my receiving side, and I started to open myself up to the idea of I receive. I receive, I can receive, I can receive. And I felt like it was bringing balance, and to where instead of me sort of being this, instead of charging my body to where I'm just like releasing one vibration where it's like I'm only channeling light, instead what happened was I felt like my body was kind of balanced. It was balanced, and I felt grounded. And so I was sitting there and I kind of went like this. And then I suddenly, I was just, had my eyes closed, and I realized, oh my gosh, it's the yin yang, because this is my receiving side and this is my giving side. And I had part here and part here, and it was balancing out the flow at that time in my body. And so what was happening was I had, and so then you have like this image, right? So you have, I put one hand here, and then all of a sudden you're kind of, and this is a pretty famous image. You start to see, when you start to look at it from the eyes of sacred geometry, starts to kind of make a little bit more sense. And the image actually that I was seeing in my head was actually more like this. Well, I guess I can't really draw what I'm seeing, but it was a Celtic knot kind of image, and I was seeing this, and I was actually feeling kind of the flow of it. And then what happened was then someone passed me the harmonium. It was my turn to sing, and I was really in this space of feeling grounded and comfortable and balanced. And it was time to sing to Shiva. And Shiva represents destruction, the destruction that must take place before creation. And so Shiva represents a lot of different things, but in this context, I was thinking about the hurricane and all the videos I'd been seeing, the people who were really suffering, and I just spoke aloud the prayer, for the people that were suffering, and we began to sing to Shiva. And there is this aspect of Shiva who is Bhairav. And Bhairav, he roams the battlefield after a war, to be present in the space where all of these bodies still are. He roams the cremation grounds after bodies have been burned. He's comfortable with death, and not in like a delightful way, like I'm consuming. It's in there's a heaviness, there's a somberness, there's an intensity to the experience of like, there's tragedy, there's death, this is happening. Om Namah Shivaya. This is an intense experience. I felt like as a collective, we were really singing and praying and just grieving with. But I also felt like as we were singing, we were assisting in transmuting or sort of transforming some of that energy, like helping to metabolize it for our fellow humans. And it was a really powerful experience. But it was not the kind of experience that it didn't seem appropriate to be channeling just the highest vibrations of love and light, and I'm blissed out and I'm happy and it's just so beautiful, and it wasn't that. It was heavy, and it was sad, and it was intense, and it was beautiful in a very different sort of way, a losing your innocence sort of way. It was and so I think that in order to be spiritually mature, we, I have had to learn to hold both, that balance within my body. And when I first started getting into this, I mean, I've been at this for 15 years. So in the beginning, there would be times where I'd sit in the temple room, I would sing, I would pray, I would open myself up to this space and just be, and there's this term, it's called blissed out, because you're just receiving so much light, so much love, so much energy. It's just so beautiful to see the heart of God, to feel the heart of God, to feel it within you. And so then when you're in that space where you're just seeing the light, well, anything that's the opposite of that is darkness. Anything that's the opposite of that would knock you out of that is evil. And so this idea that, we hold both in our bodies, and it's the balance, allows us to have a sort of more mature view. And so you've got darkness and light, positive and negative. Well, it's also feminine and masculine. And so the masculine is that directed energy, right? That masculine is the, it's quite literally, in Hinduism, it's quite literally the phallus. And so in Hinduism, the masculine is represented by this. And it's a penis. It's called the Shiva Lingam. So it quite literally represents the penis of the masculine, okay? It's quite a literal. And also there are stories of this going all the way to heaven, and it never ends. And so you can also imagine that it might be like light, but you've got the feminine. So the masculine is directed. It's the giving, right? I'm giving. It's directed, it's focused, this is where my energy is going. And the feminine is the receptive, right? I'm receiving the energy. And so that would be this side. That would be the womb. That would be the cave. That would be the earth. That would be the darkness. And it's not the darkness of evil. It's the darkness of the void. It's the darkness of the new moon without the stars and the moon. It's the darkness of the cave. It's that quiet, receptive space. It's all the potential energy that could be. And so, and that is represented by, it's just going to be easier if I show you a better picture rather than trying to draw it. So, that is represented by the yoni. And so this is the Shiva Lingam, and these symbols represent Shiva and his third eye. And this is actually these rocks. Oops. So this is a stone. A lot of people have these stones on their altars, and then they have something like this, which holds the stone. And so you have, this is the feminine. This is the receptive piece. And now I will do a whole video on this and kind of what the Hindu traditions are about this. But you have, this is the feminine and the masculine, and it's the coming together that brings the balance. It's the coming together that is the yin and the yang. So these are two different religions. You've got Hinduism and Buddhism, and they're expressing this same idea of the balance, of the polarity of the positive and the negative, of the direct that's flowing out and the receptive energy that's taking in to bring the balance. And so once you know that, once you have that perspective, then you could say that there is giving and there's receiving. And so there are people who are off balance in both. There are people who give too much and don't take enough. That's off balance. And there are people who take too much and don't give enough, and that's off balance. And in general, within the context of community, I've seen it a lot because I've been around like a lot of kind of different community environments. There are some people who are just take way more than they give. And you know, if you kind of confront them about it, it's like, well, what? It was available for me to receive, so I received it, you know. And so those people are not regulating within their own selves the balance of the giving and the taking. And so what starts to happen when you're off balance is you have negative consequences. And so when I'm in a state where I'm giving all the time, then what happens is I get off balance, I get exhausted, I get depleted, I'm not able to continue, right? That's illogical. When people are in a state where they're receiving all the time and they are not balancing it out by giving, well, there's things don't flow well for them either. And, you know, now it makes sense to understand that we go through seasons in our lives. I go through seasons of my life where it's time for me to receive or it's time for me to give. So, but now evil is something different, because evil is crossing a line from I'm receiving to I'm taking, I'm stealing, I'm violating a principle of the universe and taking what is not mine to take. So it's one thing if let's just say I go to a potluck and I make cupcakes, and I show up with the cupcakes and I made one for each person. I knew how many people were going to be there. I brought a tray of cupcakes and I made one for each person, and someone comes along and they go, oh, this is so good. And they eat a cupcake and then they take 5 more. And then, you know, they come back, they take, and other people don't get one. So that's one version. That's, you know, taking more than your share will put you off balance. And the universe, I do think, evens that out eventually. But that's very different than if somebody breaks into my house and takes my cupcakes or whatever it is, right? They're stealing. And then it's a completely another story if somebody murders me and takes my cupcakes, right? Like they are violating a principle of morality. I would almost, I tend to view it in terms of like a video game and the rules of the game, because it helps me to take religion out of the equation and say the way that this earth 3D physical reality is designed, there are principles to the way it works. And so you know, the fundamental principle is I think it's something like the non-aggression principle, where, you know, this is me, this is you, and your rights end where my rights begin, right? So you don't have a right to murder me or steal, whatever it is, right? It's consensual, voluntary action. And so if I'm consensually and voluntarily offering the cupcakes and someone takes more than their share, well, it's off balance, but it's not evil. It's not a crime. If I'm non-consensual and somebody is stealing from me, then, you know, that is against the laws of morality. So we see this where, let's just say in the case of physical connection, and you know, maybe you might sleep with somebody and perhaps it wasn't the best choice, but it was consensual, and so later you might go, gosh, that wasn't a very good choice, I regret that, I felt used or whatever, but I'm not going to make that choice again. That's really different than if somebody, you know, essay, you know, and actually steals that and forces themselves upon you. That is immoral. And perhaps, I think, what people refer to when they are using the word evil. The problem is, I think that word has lost its potency or meaning. And so I just think it's an interesting conversation, and I do think that there are things that are happening that could be considered evil, quite certainly defined as evil. But I think that by using that word and not defining out exactly what we are meaning, we lose the potency of the conversation, and it's an excuse to sort of dismiss other people. And so I think, and the thing is that then the word gets used really loosely. So you might look at someone who is a serial killer and say, oh my gosh, that person's evil for what they're doing. Or you might look at like a corporation is doing this horrible thing, and then their actions are evil, and so then but then you start to get into territory that it gets hard to define, and it gets hard to have a discourse with other people who are not using language in the same way. And so this is where I feel like the divide starts to get bigger and bigger. So I don't think, using both sides of the force, so to speak, is bad. As long as you are not violating the fundamental morality of this space. When you start to get off balance in either direction, and when you cross the lines into violating the morality of this space that we're in, this simulation or program or human experience, whatever you want to call it, things start to come back upon you. So the last thing I will say is that I believe, I talk about the way that I hold or move energy in my body, or the way that I've learned to do this. And I am operating from a perspective of the universe that energy is infinite, that I receive energy, and that it's always available to me. So when I feel exhausted, depleted, tired, sick, whatever it is, it's that I just need to reorient myself so that I'm in balance and that I'm able to efficiently receive from the universe. But there are people who get their energy, it would be the equivalent of like a vampire, a psychic vampire. And there are people who are operating in a different way here on this physical reality, and they are taking energy, forcibly taking energy from other humans. And so, you hear about the idea of somebody doing a ritual and maybe performing violence and taking somebody's life for the purpose of taking their energy, or different things like that. And so those are people who are operating in a different set of energetic principles. It's a different way of operating, and I personally don't think it is right. I also don't think it's the most beneficial for the people operating in that way, because I truly do believe that what you give out comes back to you 3 times. It's like you're pointing, 3 fingers come back. Like, so if you're giving out good, good comes back to you. And if you're giving out bad, bad things happen, because it's always got to balance itself out. And so if we are, certainly we need to have clear and healthy boundaries so that we're not being abused. But when there are other people being abusing, rather than just dismissing them and it's like, well, they're evil, they're terrible, like, certainly it's important to recognize like that person is not operating in a way that is conducive to the ways of moral and ethical behavior, but that's going to come back upon them. I mean, we're seeing it happen right now with P. Diddy, a lot of the things we're hearing about, these things that people in power or elites have been doing, we've suspected for a long time, but we're starting to find out on a more detailed level. It's horrific. It's tragic, that people have been put through these things, and I don't support it at all. And some people would say, well, those people are evil. Well, maybe they are. And maybe also they have been shown that they can get power a certain way, and they feel stuck there now. And I don't know what the answer is, but to just dismiss everybody and say, or maybe there's different levels of it. Maybe the person at the top who's just fully given themselves over to evil, to this idea that they're going to ruthlessly overpower other people and manipulate people into overpowering other people. Maybe at the top they've just sort of forfeited their soul or their salvation, or what do I mean when I say that? Like their ability to connect in with the divine love and light, and they're off balance in a negative way. Maybe they're sort of a lost cause. They don't want to change, but maybe there's other people that have sort of tasted it or been manipulated into things and done things that they really regret and they really wish they hadn't done, who are still redeemable, to use another Christian phrase, but who are, it's not too late for them to come into balance. So I don't know, just interesting conversations I love to have. I could talk more about this. So please, I would love to hear your perspectives on this. Much love.